Hello. All right. Hey, all right. Now you can hear me, right? All right, thank you very much. Let's get started here. It's a little after 7 o'clock. It's a Tuesday night, and we have so many people who have come out, and I really appreciate that. Thank you all for coming. First of all, I know there's a lot of energy here. Right now, let's just clap for your favorite candidate right now. Just do it. All right. Excellent. My name is Brant Williams. I'm the moderator tonight. I'm a correspondent for Minnesota Public Radio. I've been covering criminal justice for over 10, 15 years or so. It's a subject near and dear to my heart, so I'm very glad to be able to be here tonight for this event. You can clap for, that's very nice of you. Thank you so much. Tonight's forum is hosted by American Civil Liberties Union of Minnesota, Black Votes Matter, Immigrant Law Center, Jewish Community Action, League of Women Voters Minnesota, and League of Women Voters Golden Valley, the National Council on Jewish Women, and Women's March Minnesota. I also want to thank our candidates for being here, Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman and Mark Haase. Now, you're all here tonight because you understand the central role that the county attorney plays in the criminal justice system. As you may be aware, the county attorney has discretion on whether to charge, what to charge certain people. It is an elected position. It's nonpartisan. Criminal attorneys also manage a law office, which includes civil attorneys. They cover areas as well as child protection services as well. So there's a lot that goes on in the county attorney's office. Now, before we get started, just a few ground rules. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves. We're going to give them also 2 minutes at the end of the night for a closing statement. We're going to start with some community members who've been selected to read some questions. Each candidate will get 90 seconds to respond. We've got a timer here. We're going to try to keep everyone on time as best we can. I may ask a follow-up question, and we'll give each candidate 30 seconds to respond to that follow-up question. Now, as you may have seen, in the audience, you may have already received a note card. That's where you can write down questions. They'll be handed to me. I've already got some of them right now. So at a certain point in the evening, I'm going to read some of these questions. And again, we're going to follow the same rules about timing for each candidate to answer those questions. We want to try to group some of these questions together so we don't wind up asking the same question over and over. So again, my role is to keep us on point, get us out of here on time, and make sure nobody dies. That's my main thing. I also want to make sure that we, in order to keep this thing going, I wanted to get you guys to clap and cheer a little bit beforehand because I don't want you to do that after every answer that a candidate gives, because that's going to take away from the time that they have. And again, we just want to make sure that there's enough time to get as many questions asked and answered tonight. Now, we are also, if you know people who could not be here, let them know that the forum is being live streamed on the Uptake. And tomorrow morning you can hear a news story on Minnesota Public Radio News by me. All right. So let us get started here with first candidate. Mark, why don't you start with 2 minutes? Introduce yourself to everyone.
Thank you, Grant. Is it okay if I stand up?
Yes, you can.
For the intro, I'd like to stand up. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. My name is Mark Haase. Thank you to all the hosts, including NPR and North High School. About 20 years ago, I started to learn that our justice system was violating many of my core values, and that it was destroying the lives of many of my neighbors. I thought it was meant to protect me and my family, but I've come to learn that in many ways it makes us less safe. I couldn't stand idly by while that continued, so I decided to dedicate my career to justice reform. Now, I'm asking you for your support to be our next county attorney, because I know that with the right leadership, together, we can create a justice system that's not only more just, but it's more effective. Now, if you're okay with the status quo, you may want to support and vote for my opponent. He's been in office almost 20 years. He was a legislator in the 80s and our chief prosecutor in the 90s, and he helped to create this status quo. And he still defends it, and I've seen him stand in the way of some really good reforms over the years. Now that he has a challenger for the first time in 12 years, he's starting to talk about some of the reforms that people have been asking for. He's asking us to return him for a 6th term in office. My response to that is, it's just too little, too late. If we're going to have the change we need, we also don't just need a new leader, we need a new kind of leadership. We need a county attorney who's going to...
Okay, Mark,
Yes.
I think we got
2 minutes
we got
already?
Your stop there. That was 2 minutes. It went
Wow.
really quickly.
Sorry about that.
Thanks.
Did as
That's
best
all
as
right.
I
We'll
could.
have time to close up on that too. Thank you, Mark. Mike, 2 minutes. Introduce yourselves to everyone.
Thank you. And I'm Mike Freeman. I'm your Hennepin County attorney, and thank you for the honor of giving me a chance to lead this great office. It's the biggest public law office in the state of Minnesota, 400 employees and a $60 million budget. We do child support work. We help to collect $100 million of child support. We do child protection to make sure our kids get the food and clothing and shelter and education they deserve. We do civil commitment work. And we also are the civil counsel for the Hennepin County with its 9,000 employees and $2 billion budget. It's a huge management and administrative task, and I think I've done fairly well in doing that part of the job. The criminal prosecution part gets most of the attention. My philosophy is strong but just prosecution, focusing on violent offenders, to enforce and enhance public safety and to protect and support victims. On the other scope are the lower criminal charges. My goal is to keep kids and adults out of the system at all possible for their minor mistakes. In juveniles, we've decriminalized truancy and curfew. We reduced school offenses. We diverted fully 1/3 of the cases brought to us. We do alternative sentences, and in detention, the number of kids in the juvenile detention center has been cut in more than half. For adults, we use diversion both pre-charge and post-charge. We use drug court, mental health, and veterans court. All of these alternatives that enhance public safety. We've increased the diversity in our office from 3% of our attorneys, people of color, to 24%. We've done other innovations in the office. 2 years ago, I discontinued the use of grand juries in officer-involved shooting cases to make it more transparent and more accountable. I've redesigned drug charges and sentences. We've tried to reduce criminal impacts to lower-level offenders. I look forward to talking on further ideas of the future as we move forward tonight. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mike. All right, now we're going to start with our first question, community question. James is going to ask the first question. And I believe we're going to have a little bit of audio-visual to go along with this. We should.
I'm James Baduel, and I'm the State Prison Outreach Chair for the NAACP. What I do for them is that I get into the community, I get with people running for the candidacy, and I deal with people that's incarcerated. And so what I do, it's not outreach, it's inreach. And so we reach into the community, we reach into people, and we dig out everything that we need in order to transform the criminal justice system so that we can start transforming our communities. When I think about mass incarceration, it was a mass shipment of people coming over here, and now it's a mass shipment of people being locked up in prison. So if you know anything about slavery, that's exactly what it is. Just by what we wear, we get looked at a certain way for that. And so it's all about how other people don't like dealing with another group of people. Growing up, we never liked the police because they never came around for anything good. And if we ever called them and we needed something, they would always take hours and hours. But let something happen wrong and they right there on time. And so anybody that has that type of value system is very harmful, not only just to the black community, but all people, and even to themselves. Because at any point in given time, they can feel that if your value system doesn't align with mine, then you deserve to die. Their power trickles down all the way down to the police officers and how the police officers would treat us. Just like in the school, the principal, the vibe of the principal is going to determine the structure of the school. And so if the value of the county attorney is messed up, nobody in the courtroom is going to care, nobody on the outside within the police department is going to care, because higher up, they know that they can be comfortable if they had the same values as the county attorney. We want them to get to know us, and we want to get to know them too. I think starting to build relationships is going to be the biggest change for the world. I'm James Baduel, and I'm a state prison.
Just repeat. And our questioner. You look very familiar. Oh.
Good to see y'all. Y'all ready?
Yeah, I think we can hear
All
you.
right, great. And so I truly believe that the only way that we will get better is for ourselves to be better. And the only way by doing that is not by action, but it starts first with the way that we think. And so my question is not a question that's outside of ourselves, but I would like to know, by you guys being the first to see this video, along with the audience, so now we're all in the same boat, because it's not about seats, it's about people. What part of that video resonated with you, and how are you going to continue to challenge yourself to disrupt mass incarceration?
Mike, we'll start with you. 90 seconds. What was your response?
Well, the question, I think, is what are we going to do about mass incarceration?
I didn't ask that. I said what part, number one, resonated with you. So answer that first. And then after you answer that, what are you going to do next to disrupt mass incarceration?
What resonated with me was your comments about society and how they perceive people and what the criminal justice system does to others. And part of the accusations have been that we have mass incarceration, which unfairly and inappropriately put people in prison, often for minor offenses. Well, frankly, I've spent my career trying to keep young people out of the criminal justice system. Many years ago, I started the Be at School program, which is focused on young people and truancy and keeping them in school. We also began to enforce curfew rules to keep young people off the streets late at night. We decriminalized that. That's no longer part of the criminal process. We reduced referrals from schools by 70%. Schools should deal with minor issues themselves. We divert fully a third of all the juvenile cases brought to us by the police, 2,000 out of the 6,000 we get. And as I said earlier, we have reduced the number of people in the juvenile detention center. We've done other things for adults as well, but I focused on kids and those minor offenses. They should not be involved in the criminal justice system. A minor mistake when they're young shouldn't impact the rest of their life, and I think that's one of the most meaningful things we can do to reduce mass incarceration.
Thank you, Mike. Mark?
Thanks for sharing your story, James. What most resonated with me from your video was how you talked about the importance of the values of a prosecutor. I totally agree. I'm running for this office because as a child, I got a lot of second chances. I had a mom who worked long hours, was widowed. I had 3 siblings, and I got into some trouble. And I know I got a lot of chances that it's taken me a long time to really appreciate. And now I've come to begin to understand that not everybody has those kind of chances. And often, whether you have those chances or not depends, unfortunately, in our justice system by how much money you have or the color of your skin. And there's things that we can do to end that, like we can stop prosecuting marijuana offenses that our county attorney's office has still been prosecuting as felonies. We can also make sure that our children have a second chance. When Mike Freeman was a legislator, he authored a bill that made nonviolent juvenile offenses, charges, public. That can end a life for a mistake when somebody's 16 or 17 years old. And that's the kind of system we've created that it's not only a mass incarceration problem, it's a mass criminalization problem, and it's a perpetual punishment problem. And there's things that the county attorney can do and that I'll do when I'm in office. Thanks again, James.
Thanks. We're going to have a lot of questions to follow up from the audience, so I'm not going to take too much time doing follow-ups right now, but I want to get on to our next community questioner so we can keep this going, because I know we're going to have a lot more questions to ask. So John is next with our next question. We're going to be talking about bail reform.
Okay, yeah, my name is John. I live in North Minneapolis. I'm a member of Jewish Community Action. In my own personal life, I've had to pay cash bail for nonviolent offenses. When I wake up in jail and go to court, the running narrative of the prosecutor is that I'm dangerous. When they're explaining this stuff, it always sounds excruciatingly believable. It's dramatic. I've never been convicted of anything violent in my life. One specific time I was arrested for an offense. A bail was set. It was too high for me to make. I sat in the county jail waiting for trial, went to trial, lost my trial, went to prison for 20 months, got out of prison, went back to prison for 3 more months on technical violations, only to get out after that and find out a month later that my conviction was overturned. My appellate defender said if it weren't my life, the trial would have been a joke. If I had been released, I could have prepared a defense. I wouldn't have wasted 2 years of my life in a cage for nothing. Minnesota's Constitution prohibits excessive bail, but does not require individuals to post money bail at all. Thus, prosecutors have the discretion to refrain from asking courts to require money bail. Would you commit to starting a system that ends in release without cash bail in most circumstances?
Okay. Mark, let's start with you. Ending cash bail in most yes.
Thanks for your question, John. The answer to your final question is yes, I would commit to that. Another problem with your story that you didn't mention that I want to point out, though, is that somebody accused of a much more serious crime, if they have money, they can get out of jail before their trial. Nobody I've talked to thinks that that's a system that's okay. My opponent has said it's not a priority for him to change that system. It absolutely needs to be a priority. It's being changed all over the country. There's very clear, concrete things we can do to change it. Another thing, you mentioned the difficulty in defending yourself in those cases, John. Another problem is that research has shown when people are held pre-trial, they're more likely to reoffend. So it's another case of how a system is actually making us less safe. We can move to a more risk-based system. That's what I would push for. I would not recommend bail in cases where there's not a clear public safety threat like you're asking. I'm sorry that you had that experience, and I'm going to do all I can to make sure that others don't have that kind of experience.
Mike, to you, cash bail reform?
Thank you for sharing your story, and I'm sorry that you spent that kind of period of time in jail. I'm not familiar with your case, but I believe that no one should be held in jail because they're poor. Bail is established for 2 reasons: to protect public safety for people who've committed serious crimes and to make sure that a person returns for their court appearances. In Hennepin County, we use a risk assessment tool, which evaluates the seriousness of the alleged offense, the record of returning if you've been in the criminal justice system before, and your criminal history, among other things. More than 80% of the people who are in jail initially are released prior to trial, leaving only the most serious offenders in jail. We use sign and release for those out on warrants, important and substantial reform. In the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, we use summons for most property and drug cases, the more minor crimes, which means the individual is never in jail. And we standardize bail recommendations to judges. Remember, judges set the bail, we make recommendations. Finally, we use book and release, where a person is booked, fingerprinted, and then released in the same day. So I think we have made some progress on the bail issue, and I'm in favor of moving forward on that reform.
I think that sounds really good, but right now we have people held in jail in Hennepin County tonight that can't afford just a few $100s to pay a private bail bond company.
Mark, actually, I did have a follow-up question for you, though. The state of California recently passed a legislation to abolish cash bail, but there was some concern by the ACLU of California that there was still left too much discretion by judges to set who should stay locked up and who should be set free. What kind of criteria should there be, and how do you regulate that? How do you regulate, standardize those criteria for judges to follow when it comes to if there's going to be no cash bail in most of these cases, who should go free and who should stay locked up?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I agree with those concerns. We want to proceed somewhat carefully so that we don't have unintended consequences and give too much discretion where that people are just being held with no recourse. What we need to do is move more towards a truly risk-based assessment, risk assessment. What we're using now uses factors like employment and housing stability, which we know overlaps with poverty and race. We need to get those types of things out of the risk assessment, and we need to really just push the system harder to make sure we're only people being held if they're actually a public safety risk.
Okay, thanks. Mike, to you, the same question, 30 seconds to follow up as far as the criteria, and he mentioned the risk assessment. Is that risk assessment fair?
I share your concern about what's happening in California, which was part of your first question. There's concern by people that there will be racial impacts because of the systems that's set up with the judges. To answer your question specifically, I think that we have made some valiant efforts in the risk assessment tool. Hennepin County's method is being shared statewide and in other states. It is assessed every couple of years to make sure the criteria is fair. But as I said to you, many of the people in jail.
I'm going to have you to stop, bro. Did you have one more word or two to add there?
No.
Or is it? Okay. All right, we'll come back to that. All right, I want to get our next community partner to ask her question. We're going to talk about racial disparities now. Anika.
Hey. Thank you. So my question is, will you decline to file charges against an individual with evidence indicating racial profiling or other racial violence, stopping, searching, hotspotting, and arresting individuals if it's been found that some of those tactics have been at play?
Okay. Mike, you've got the microphone in your hand. That question.
The short answer is yes, I will not charge those cases. When we learned about the Minneapolis Police Department sting operation, which they did not share with us ahead of time, and those cases came in over a 3-month period of time, along with 1,000 other drug and property cases. When we learned of it, we had already put a number of those. We had dismissed some, we had diverted others, and we dismissed them all. Racial profiling doesn't belong in the criminal justice system, and I will not prosecute cases brought to us as a result of racial profiling.
All right. Short and sweet. Mark, same question to you.
My answer is also no, I would not charge those cases. And Mike, you said that you didn't know there was a pattern there. Like, that's your job. This is your office. And this is a pattern we've known has been happening for a long, long time. We've done studies and had conversations over and over and again. But what are we actually doing about it? And we need to know what our prosecutors are doing. We need to give them direction to not do those things that have a disparate impact. We know that marijuana, it's a known fact that a black person is 6 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana in Hennepin County, even though people in different races use it at the same rate. So as prosecutor, with knowing that, I would just stop charging those cases. And this is a much bigger problem. It's not just the police. 53% of people convicted of a felony in 2016 in Hennepin County were African American. County population of African American is only 13%. And my opponent said he doesn't think there's a racism problem in his office. That just shows a very lack of understanding of the issue. We all have a race problem. Our society has a race problem. And until we recognize it and start to really do something, we have to recognize it and admit it before we really do something about it.
Mike, a follow-up for you. 30 seconds just in response to that about the sting operation. In working with Minneapolis Police Department, I understand that county attorneys have to work closely with Minneapolis police officers when it comes to certain, to ensure that they present evidence for cases that will make for stronger prosecutions or more sure prosecutions. Isn't part of that conversation, that training, include, hey, you have to be careful about racial profiling, any type of bias in your policing? Does that ever come up in those discussions, in that training?
We have lots of discussions with the cops. We talk with them about we won't accept cases of racial profiling. Chief Arredondo has said that that's his position. We on occasion see a case which we think has been inappropriately, the arrest has been, and we don't charge that case. There's no question there's racial bias. That's why I put all my people through implicit bias training, every person in the office. That's why I've increased the number of people, attorneys of color, from 3% to 24% while I've been county attorney. We've been working at this a long time. Racial bias is throughout our society, and we need to work together to resolve it.
Okay, thanks. And Mark, for you, you have 30 seconds to follow up on that. You heard Mike's response. What would you do in that case? You're talking to police officers about don't bring me cases where it's clear that you've been targeting black people. Do you do that?
We will certainly train police officers, and we'll continue to have implicit bias training, but that's not enough. We've been doing that for a long time. We need to change the actual policies that create these disparities, and that's what I'm talking about. Changing the fact that if somebody possesses drugs, the first thing we do is give them a felony arrest and prosecution. That's going to give them a record that makes things harder for them. And we know that there's racial biases in those arrests, people coming into the system for those things. Cash bail is another thing that I'm making a priority because of the racial disparities there.
All right, sorry, we got you in 30 seconds. Okay, we are going to go into our next community questioner. We've got Kenya, who's going to come up and talk about community engagement and transparency. And I think we are also going to have some AV as well, I think. All right, good.
I'm an auntie. I'm an engaged person in the community, loving. I'm a lot of things. I'm also the president and founder of the Black Women's Wealth Alliance. I grew up in North Minneapolis for the past 33 years. I still live there. And I've worked around community for the past 17 years. More specifically around police violence. I've been a part of a lot of community conversations, actions that had protests that have taken place, court hearings, all sorts of things, and just being a person who grew up around it every day. I've been involved in it in a lot of different ways. At one point, the conversation, how do we change police brutality? I think it really is embedded in the culture of violence. Changing part of the culture of violence, which means we also got to change the conditions of our community. Our community wouldn't be a training ground for cops to come and build up their toughness or what they think is what makes them hardcore because they worked in the black community terrorizing black people. It's about process. It's like a computer technical driven machine that lacks the human element to it. There isn't a lot of explanation as to what's happening. They just want to create order. To me, it's gonna take someone who's not only a visionary, but who's also extraordinarily courageous, ambitious, and committed to justice from my eyes.
not from theirs. They have to look at justice through the people who've been experiencing injustice in order to even understand and know what it looks like. And the great Albert Pike said, when logic and laws conflict, laws are changed, right? And so we've got to be willing to change policy, processes, and laws if it makes sense for what needs to happen in order for justice to prevail. So that's my take.
Hi. Thank you.
Good evening. I'll say it again. Good evening.
Good evening.
Is everybody woke in here? All right. So I'm Kenya McKnight-Ahad. One of my follow-up questions to you is, I like what James said, so I want to build on that. What stood out to you in this video as the first part of the question? And maybe, is it okay if I allow them to answer that before I say the second question, or would you prefer me to just say it all?
Why don't you just give them both questions, and then we'll have to
Figure it out.
try to
Okay.
fit it out both in there.
Thank you. Second part is, will you commit to developing and implementing a plan to personally, regularly, and meaningfully engage and communicate with all your constituents within your county within the first 100 days of your term, especially communities of color, immigrant communities, community-based organizations, and criminal justice reform advocates, and to involve us in determining the priorities of your office?
All right, thanks. Mark, let's start with you.
It was Kenza, right?
Kenya.
Kenya, thank you. Kenya, it's really easy for me or Mr. Freeman to say yes to that. I am going to do that, but I hope you'll look at, particularly in my case, what I have been doing. Those of you who are in the room who know me well from this work for a long time know that I've been engaging with these communities for a decade to work on these issues. That's not going to change when I get in office. This is not about me getting into office. This is about the work that we've been doing together. That's going to continue with an ally in that office. I plan to have a community advisory board. That's a way to get the community involved, but it's more about really the policy and getting into some of those things. I think that'll help. But the real important thing is that I'm going to always be willing to listen, even when the Thurman Blevins family was getting very angry and heated about the decision in that case. Mike left the room. I don't think that's what a leader should do, even when things are uncomfortable. I will never leave the room, no matter how unhappy you are with what I'm doing. I will stay and listen, and I hope you believe me when I say that.
Thanks. Mike, first of all, what resonated with you with the video, and then the second part of her question about... The first part of her question was about what resonated with you initially about the video, and then as well as the committing to opening that type of relationship.
What I learned from the video was a very earnest reaching out, asking those people involved in the criminal justice system to share and to listen and to be involved in the community. And I thought it was nicely said, Kenya. Thank you very much. And let me tell you what I've already been doing. I have regular community meetings, as do other people in my office. We go out into the community to listen, to talk with individuals. I've also found it absolutely necessary that our office needs to reflect the community that we live in. That's why the attorneys in my office have gone from 3% people of color to 24%. My previous chief deputy was Charlene Hatcher, a black woman who's now on the bench. My present chief deputy in the civil part is Lolita Ulloa, an Ecuadorian immigrant, and I've learned from both of them and their contacts in the community about things our office needs to be doing. Finally, I have regular meetings with individuals of color in my office to make sure that the things we're doing make sense. They're the people who see it most directly. So I'll continue the community work, and I'll continue the outreach, and I'll continue the diversity in my office, which I think is critical.
Quick follow-up for Mark. I want to touch on something that Kenya's mentioned in her video, that she feels it's important for someone in your position, or if you are elected as a county attorney, to look at justice through the eyes of people who experience injustice. How do you do that?
I try really, really hard because it's not possible for me to fully know your experience. I know that all I can do is to listen, to try to understand. And the other thing I wanted to say about your video, Kenya, sorry I sort of missed that in my answer, is you talked about courage. You know, courage, there's a lot of things that require courage, and I think what requires the most courage in a leader is to be willing to admit when they don't have all the answers, when they need help making decisions, when they need to listen to people, and that's the kind of leadership that I think I display and that I plan to continue to follow.
Okay, thank you. It's 30 seconds. Mike, I'll give you the same follow-up question. Looking through the eyes of someone who has experienced injustice, how do you talk to that person? How do you feel that?
First, you have to be a really good listener, and you have to make sure that you have people like Kenya around you, and you give them opportunities to share with you, and you listen openly. That's not easy. It's hard to be in other people's shoes, but you need to work at it. And we do that in our, as I said before, in our community outreach and the people we hire. I think anybody in my staff knows the door is open, and we listen and we talk about justice and we talk about racial bias. Those are topics of conversation today in the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, and they've been conversations we've been having for the last 19 years.
Okay. Thank you very much. We've got another community partner who's going to ask a question here. Danielle has a question. We are going to talk about immigration.
Yes. I didn't know if there was a video or not.
There is a video? Oh, okay. Good. Well, you get an extra minute or so.
I've been working at it for a long time. I started to learn more about immigration and immigrant rights when I lived in Texas. I was living on the border and working in a shelter for people who had just crossed the border, and we gave them emergency shelter. So I kind of knew at that time, and I was very young when I did it. I think I was in my early 20s. I started to realize that the country didn't have certain protections and resources for people depending on their legal status. I do the work that I do right now because we're in a crisis for immigrants. When Trump came into power, there was this new, renewed focus on removing as many people as possible. Here in Minneapolis, this city is full of immigrants from around the world, and that's pretty amazing. But Trump is really trying to dedicate as many resources as possible to removing people that he doesn't like. It's really unfortunate because it's created this really deep fear in the community about whether they themselves or one of their family members who they really love is going to get swept up in this. Undocumented people are targeted for violent crimes because it's common knowledge that they're defenseless and they're not going to run and call the police. So that's already the common thinking or the stereotype, and it's becoming even more true right now because people don't feel comfortable picking up the phone and calling the police. Or if they happen to call the police, because I've had a client who was hit in the head with a baseball bat and then robbed. He didn't have any choice. Somebody else called the police and the police came. It's a situation where people are getting taken advantage of and they feel like they can't trust the police. It's a very difficult time. People are just scared to be out there and put themselves out there because they know that they're vulnerable to deportation.
All right. Now, Danielle,
Hi, thank you. So I'm an immigration attorney here in Minneapolis, and I regularly represent individuals who are put into removal proceedings after being picked up by ICE inside the Hennepin County Jail. From my view, there's a thriving practice of collaboration between Hennepin County and the local ICE office. The affected communities are highly aware of this because it is their family, friends, coworkers, and neighbors who are being swept up in the deportation machine. So my question for both of you is, what is your legal position on ICE holds, which, to explain to the audience, is the practice of continuing to hold somebody for ICE despite the fact that the state has ordered a person released from custody. So are ICE holds constitutional, whether it's a hold for 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 48 hours? And will the county honor ICE holds going forward?
Okay, well, Mike, we'll start with you.
Well, the answer is no. We will not honor any ICE holds, the 48-hour hold or the extra 5 minutes. People can only be held in a Hennepin County jail for state offenses, and when their time is up, they must be released. That was not always the practice in Hennepin County, and I pushed our sheriff very hard to say he can't do 48-hour holds anymore. With the help of the county board, that practice was eliminated in Hennepin County, and I'm glad it was. Now let me expand.
Okay, hey, please.
Let me expand a little bit.
Thank you.
Local law enforcement should not and must not help ICE or anyone else to enforce federal immigration laws. To ensure that we do that, we work with people, immigrants and other people without documentation to make sure that their rights are protected. And I have a person whose office is next to mine. Her name is Lolita Ulloa. She's an Ecuadorian immigrant. She makes certain that we do that right. Hennepin County Attorney's Office issues more U visas than any other office in the country. You could count on me to fight against any of these unconstitutional acts on immigration rights. You can count on me.
Thanks. Mark, same question to you.
Thanks for your work, Danielle. This is a very personal issue for me. The mother of my children is a Mexican immigrant, and my children have seen and felt the fear in their mother when she's been pulled over by the police. That's absolutely something that nobody that lives in our community should have to experience based on their documentation. And I agree with Mr. Freeman that we need to do everything that we can to stop the cooperation between local law enforcement, local prosecution, and immigration authorities. We need people to be able to trust our system so that it works for everybody, to be able to report crimes and be victims and cooperate as victims. You probably also know that we have a problem with ICE showing up in our courthouses. So now it's not just the criminal side. They're going to be worried to come there for family law matters, child protection matters, and we need to find a way, and I commit to working with our county board to find a way to keep ICE out of our courthouses as well.
Thanks. 30-second follow-up on that particular point, and I'll start with Mike, about the presence of ICE in the courts. Is that a problem in Hennepin County, and has your office taken a position or a stance against ICE officers attending court hearings and taking people right from the courtroom?
The problem in Hennepin County hasn't been as bad as the problem in Ramsey County, where we've seen that. I've worked with the county board to try to ensure that we do everything we can in the Hennepin County Government Center, which is owned and operated by Hennepin County, but it's also operated by the courts. Under federal law, they are entitled to be in the building, but we're trying to work very hard that they do not come in courtrooms that they don't belong or need to be in, and they don't harass people. And that's been the clear understanding from the county board with my support about what they need to do.
Okay. Same follow-up for you. Mark, do you think from the people you've talked to, do you think that there is enough being done in Hennepin County to keep immigrants safe from having an ICE officer show up during a court hearing and take them into custody?
Well, if it's happening at all, which it is, then not enough is being done. I know that some national advocacy organizations are looking at model legislation to work on this issue. There are things being done in other jurisdictions where ICE has to announce themselves when they're in the courthouse. That's something that I would look at. I think it's another area where we need to be very innovative, look what's happening in other places, and work with community groups, groups like the Legal Rights Center, the Immigrant Law Center, who work on these issues to see what can be done.
All right, thanks. Let's move on to our sixth and final community partner question. The topic is sexual assault. I think we're going to have a video or no? No video. All right. Well then, let's take it away. That's okay. Janessa, right?
Yes, that's Janessa. So just quick note, I am a victim of gendered violence, and my case was not prosecuted, or they opted not to prosecute because they told me that a jury, and this was in Hennepin County, that a jury would not understand why I went back to my abuser. So they opted not to bring charges against him. And so a detailed Star Tribune study has shown that significant numbers of rape and other sexual assaults were not properly investigated and therefore were not charged. So what changes, if any, do you support that would lead to more prosecutions of rape and sexual assault and more respectful treatment of victims of survivors of these crimes?
Mark, let's start with you on the topic of sexual assault and charging those crimes.
Jess, I'm sorry that happened to you. One of the things that we need to do that I talk about is shifting resources from some of these low-level things to make sure we're putting everything we can possibly into these most important cases, the most serious violent cases like sexual assault. We need to be sure that we have the best prosecutors there, that we have enough of them, and that they're the best trained in the region, and that they're training other prosecutors around the state and law enforcement to properly handle these cases. I also, I read in the recent story about prosecution of these cases that prosecutors don't think that there's enough to push to a jury. I think we really have to push the envelope on that. We have to make sure we give them enough, and the prosecutors shouldn't be deciding whether there's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the jury's decision. We can push these cases harder, and that's what I'm going to push for. Make sure we get as much evidence as we possibly can and not just stop because we think maybe a jury wouldn't find guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. We need to have fewer stories like yours, Jess.
Thanks. Mike?
I'm also very sorry about your case and your victimization. That is not proper. That's not conduct proud of in America, and it shouldn't occur. The criminal justice system, in many ways, doesn't do a good job of responding to acts of sexual violence. They're hard cases to prove. We need to have the evidence to be able to do it. First off, I've already asked for and receiving from the Hennepin County Board an additional prosecutor, which I'm going to embed with Minneapolis Police Department, and working with Chief Arredondo, I have insisted that if we're there, that every victim will be personally interviewed. We're trying to make sure the MPD quits redlining cases. Of the cases that get to us, we charge 50% of them, and we obtain successful pleas or jury verdicts in over 75%. Both of those numbers well exceed the national average. That doesn't mean in individual cases mistakes aren't made. And we need to continue to work with groups like the SMART team, which consists of criminal justice professionals, cops, victim advocates, victims, prosecutors, probation officers, to more thoroughly investigate and more sensitively investigate. We have work to do. I think we've made some progress, and I'm really looking forward to embedding that prosecutor in MPD to help get better cases coming from them.
Thanks. Mike, a quick follow-up, 30 seconds. I want to make sure I'm clear on something with the statistics. A statistic, I think it was at the Urban League Forum, I think I heard you say that you had like a 65% conviction rate on sexual assaults. You're saying 75%? What's the difference? Am I missing one?
We went back and reviewed the numbers, and it's actually 75% instead of 65.
Okay.
So we reviewed the numbers to ensure. I misspoke at the urban group.
Okay. All right, good. I want to make sure I was clear on that. Mark, 30 seconds for you. Is that good enough? 75%?
No, it's not good enough. There's still 25% that aren't being prosecuted, and there's all the other ones that are being reported but aren't being charged. When Mike responded to this question in an NPR interview, he said he honestly thought there was more being done. Well, it's your job to know what's happening in the system, not just within your office, but upstream to work with law enforcement and others. I don't think that this issue is new. The problem with sexual assault cases, I've spoken to sexual violence advocates who have been identifying this problem for a long, long time.
Okay.
And we should have known about it, and we should have been doing something about it a long time ago.
All right, thanks, Mark. All right, we are done with our first part of our forum with questions from our community partners. I have a stack of questions here that we've collected from you in the audience, and I'm just going to start in on them. And we are going to go and put questions to our panel, to our candidates here, and we're going to keep going for about 20 minutes or so. So here we go. First question, and I'll read the question, then I'll direct one of you to start first. First of all, what is your take on the extreme probation lengths, some of which are extended for decades? Mark, is that something that you're familiar with? What's behind that practice?
Well, there's a lot behind that practice, and yes, they're too long. Minnesota overall has the 15th highest rate of correctional control in the country, which is probation combined with incarceration. That rate has increased 275% over the last 30 years while my opponent has been in office. That comes from drug sentencing primarily, because we give very long sentences for drugs. Judges aren't comfortable always sending somebody to prison for that long, so they put them on a very long probationary sentence. That's another thing that my opponent helped design that system. And when you have a criminal record, it doesn't matter so much whether you were in prison or not. Those of you that have been impacted by the system or working in it know that what matters is you have that conviction record, and there's all kinds of things that you can't do anymore, and you're continually held back.
Mike, same question to you. Extreme lengths of probation sentences.
Minnesota has one of the lowest rates of incarceration per 100,000 in the country. One of the things that Minnesota judges do is incarcerate people for briefer periods of time and more extensive probation. That's one of the reasons that our incarceration rate is less and our probation rate is a bit longer. The Sentencing Guidelines Commission, with the support of me and other county attorneys, are reviewing the probation rates to try to make them more uniform across the country or across the state. Probation allows the person to return to society and get a job and move forward. Unfortunately, probation under Minnesota law does not allow people to vote. And I'm going back to the legislature to insist that people, when they get out of prison, have their voting rights restored. That's a critical reform we need to do tomorrow.
Okay, thanks for that. Next question. Minnesota is second in the country for racial inequities. Our child protection system is consistent with this standard. How do you plan to address the disparities that exist within the child protection system? Mike, we'll start with you.
We're working very hard in our child protection system to reduce the disparities and to try to reduce the situations where children have to be removed from their home. Child protection is a very challenging area. It never ceases to amaze me and shock me and disgust me when people don't provide for their children, the food, the shelter, the clothing, the education that they should provide. And some people even abuse the kids. And for that, we use the criminal justice system to respond. But one of the problems is that, frankly, it's very hard to get into human nature and try to correct these things. I think Hennepin County had had some problems. They recently increased their expenditures by $100 million. They've added 120 new social workers, and we've added lawyers to work with them to try to find the best result with the kids. It's not perfect, but I think we're making progress.
Mark, same question to you about racial disparities in the child protection system. What do you do about that?
Yeah, it's far, far from perfect. Minnesota has the 6th highest rate in the country of children being removed from the home. An African American child is 6 times more likely than a white child to be removed, and a Native American child is 10 times more likely. This is obviously unacceptable. Yes, it happens in all families, and it doesn't always have to result in removal. We need to give people the support they need, the food they need to feed their children to make sure that they can stay with their families as much as possible. Yes, if it's a dangerous situation, that requires a different response. What I'm going to do, this is part of my community advisory board concept, bringing subject matter experts together, looking at what's happening in the system and looking at what's happening in other places. And this is going to be focused on our office, what our office can do, not what the whole county is doing, but we have to focus on the county attorney's role, because they are the ones that are filing the petitions to remove these kids from their homes, and they have a huge role in this, and we have to really focus on why the county attorney's office is doing this.
All right, thanks. Let's move on to the next question. This is more of a personal nature, and I'll start with Mark to answer this question, and we'll move to Mike. Questioner asks, which political person and which non-political person inspires you today, and why? Personal question.
Well, I just had an event last night, and Erin Murphy introduced me, and just her energy and her ability to bring a positiveness to our politics is really inspiring to me. I think, the justice system is, it can be dark. There's a lot of pain and suffering there, but I think I want to express a hopefulness in that we can do better, that our justice system doesn't have to keep being so destructive. It can keep us safe. It's going to keep us safer if it's creating less destruction, and that's the kind of, that's why I admire Representative Erin Murphy. Non-political, my campaign manager, Margaret Zadra. She's going to hate me for saying this, but she is one of the strongest, most passionate, hardworking, smartest people I've ever met in my life, and I'm really grateful to have her.
All right, Mike, same question to you. Political and non-political person who inspires you.
And it's a great question. My political hero is Barack Obama, who with class and grace, along with his wife, Michelle, showed us an example of who America is really about. He handled difficult situations, not always the way I would have, but his process, his dignity, and his commitment to people just uplifted me every day. And I hear his voice on occasion, and I just feel uplifted. The other is Father Michael O'Connell, who left the priesthood after 50 years to marry his sweetheart. Michael is a very spiritual man and a close friend, and he inspires me by his dignity and his commitment to folks.
All right, thank you both. Next question, and we'll start with Mike. If there is one fundamental change that you can make to the county attorney's office, what would it be and how do you do it?
We need to find the time to listen better. The caseloads that we have make it very difficult to reflect the way we ought to and we want to. We have struggled, particularly with our young lawyers who have these huge caseloads because the cases are brought to us. For example, in child protection, there are so many cases that people struggle to get to them. We need to figure out a way to work more efficiently, to get the courts to work more efficiently. We need to work with other people in the criminal justice system to make our system a lot more efficient and fairer. And I think we can do that, and that's one of the tasks that I want to do in my next term, is to shorten the period of time between charge and going to trial to make it fair for everyone. And that will take resources and commitment.
Mark, same question to you. One fundamental change that you'd like to make or see in the county attorney's office, what would it be and how do you do it?
It would be to completely shift the paradigm of prosecution. And what I mean by that, one specific example of that is another current person in the news that I admire is Larry Krasner, who became the district attorney in Philadelphia. Traditionally, what line prosecutors are told to do is to charge as high as you can to try to get a plea to something lower and seek the highest into the sentencing guidelines. And if they want to go lower, then they have to get permission from their supervisor. Some of you in the audience have experienced this system. What Larry Krasner has done, which I plan to do, is to flip that upside down, so we move away from this mass incarceration and criminalization system to holding people accountable still, but not creating more harm than necessary. And the way to do that is tell line prosecutors, charge what you think is really reasonable and that you can get, and request the lowest end of the sentencing guidelines for most offenses. You know, some violent crimes we'll have to keep separate and look at individually, but for all the rest. And then if you want to go higher, there might be reasons to do that, then you get permission. And I hope you see how that flips the whole system upside down, and that's what we need to do.
All right, thanks. Next question. This is actually one from me that I wanted to make sure got into this conversation. When a police officer shoots and kills somebody, are you satisfied that the investigations that are being conducted by the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension are being done in a way that a law enforcement officer would investigate someone else shooting another person who is two people who are not law enforcement officers? Mark, let me start with you. Are you satisfied with the way that the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension investigates these types of shootings? And if you're a county attorney, how would you push them to do better if they aren't?
Well, I don't know that I'm totally satisfied, but the point, what really needs to happen there is to make sure, obviously this is built into the question, right, that we have the absolute best investigations we have on these cases, the best investigators. Based on my knowledge of these cases, I don't know that the BCA is not doing their job. It's something that I definitely want to look into and push them to do a better job. I do think it's a good idea that we have independent investigative agencies coming in to look at these cases. We don't want to have the same agency looking at these cases. That's my response. Thanks.
Okay. Mike, same question to you. Are they doing, what kind of job are they doing?
Well, first, I'm happier to have the BCA do the investigation than Minneapolis police investigate their own officers, or St. Paul police investigate their own officers. They shouldn't do that. And that's a reform years ago that I pushed very hard Minneapolis police chiefs to do, and I appreciate we started with Bob Olson years ago. It was reversed, and then Chief Harteau began it again. It's carried forward. You just simply can't have a police department investigate their own alleged violators. I think, unfortunately, my feeling about sometimes the BCA and its work was made public. We have not always been satisfied. I think we have learned to work together better, that their investigations are better, and we work to make sure that our prosecutors work as closely as we can with those investigators to make it work. They're very, very police-involved shooting cases, and I've had 3 very difficult ones, are very hard cases for the whole system and for the community. And we need the best we can have. We try to make sure we have our very best prosecutors working on them, and we ask the same of the BCA.
Thanks. Next question we are going to look at. The question is, what is your vision for the civil work done by the county attorney's office? Mike, back to you.
In my background, I'm a civil trial specialist, which means I've tried 30 civil cases to a conclusion before a jury before I became county attorney, and I still stay involved. I think we've got a very good civil division. With that civil division, we worked with others and have initiated lawsuits against the opioid manufacturers and distributors, which we should. We brought action against the Trump administration when they tried to halt funding of pregnancy prevention programs other than abstinence. In the middle of a grant, they cut off the money if we taught anything or worked with people in anything other than abstinence, which I think most people know doesn't work by itself. I think we have done a good job of representing the county. We also represent the hospital, and there are very few county attorneys and county attorneys' offices in the country that also represent hospital, and I think we do it well.
Thanks. Mark, to you, same question about a vision for a civil division in the county attorney's office.
Yeah, the civil division is a large and obviously important part of the county attorney's office. It includes child protection, which we already talked about, child support, civil commitment, and civil representation for the county. The fact that the county attorney's office civilly represents the Hennepin County Medical Center, I've wondered about that as I saw these ketamine cases. Should the county attorney's office have been able to advise the hospital on those cases? That's very concerning to me. In the civil division as well as the criminal division, one thing that I think is really important is that we hold prosecutors accountable and make sure that they're following the highest ethical standards. That's why I'm proposing to create integrity review unit to review the decisions that the county attorney's office makes, their own decisions, make sure we have the best training in ethics and that that's being followed. I'm also concerned with the recent disclosure of a police officer who forged a warrant, and that was not caught until a judge raised it. Our county attorneys should have caught that. That's the kind of thing that our county attorneys should be making sure that they're not just winning cases, but they're protecting everybody's rights and making sure that the system has complete integrity, because when it doesn't, we don't only lose cases, we lose confidence, and that's a real problem.
Thank you. 30-second follow-up on that, excuse me, that particular point, Mike, about, I believe you just was mentioning the Eden Prairie police officer, Travis Serafin, in these cases that he was involved in various degrees. Your office announced that there was a charge that he had falsified a search warrant. And I'm curious, and this is my own question as well, are there other officers that you're aware of, that your office is aware of, that are now deemed to be unreliable witnesses? I understand there are lists, and should those lists be public? Should we know about officers when they are not being truthful on search warrants?
Well, first off, I hate to contradict Mr. Haase, but he's absolutely incorrect. We worked with the judge and the police to uncover this falsified search warrant that the police did. We asked them what was there. He said it was a clerical mistake. We dug at it, and we found it out, and then we investigated all the cases, and we stood up. David Brown, our chief criminal deputy who led the investigation, came up and dismissed the cases we must. Our work on Brady and Giglio ensures that we work with individuals that these mistakes are not made, but if they are made, then they are disclosed and cleanup is done.
Okay, thank you, thank you. And later we will do a primer on Brady Giglio lists. Okay, so next question. We are getting close to the end of our evening, but I want to ask you, let's start with Mark. How should the county attorney supervise attorneys in the office to make sure that charges and sentence requests are as consistent and fair as possible?
Well, I just mentioned one thing, that we should have this integrity review unit. This is something that's happening all around the country. They're called, in other places, conviction review units. We would accept credible claims of wrongful conviction in those, and I'm curious if Mr. Freeman would be willing to form something like that in Hennepin County. That's a way to make sure that our county attorneys are following ethics and not wrongfully being part of convictions or being complicit in any police misconduct. Yeah, that's
okay.
That's what
all right, Mike. Same question to you.
Well, we presently have periodically reviews of charging standards by the supervisors and by attorneys that don't work specifically on those cases. So we've gone back in the last 2 years and looked at every sex case that we did not charge to find out why we didn't, was there sufficient evidence to charge it, and we frankly, out of 60 cases, recharged 3 cases. We do that with our juvenile justice folks and check to make sure that how they're charging cases is appropriate, and sometimes reverse decisions. We haven't found it necessary to have civil groups and special review groups because, frankly, we have not found the kind of misconduct or bad practice that has existed elsewhere in the country. I'm proud of that.
All right, thank you, Mike. Okay, now we are going to wrap up our question portion and allow 2 minutes for each candidate to just give us a closing statement. Mark, well, actually, we started with you at the opening, so before we'll start with Mike. In closing, give us 2 minutes, make your case.
Well, thank you, and thank you, members of the audience, for coming and listening. We appreciate that, and Brant, thank you for being here And I'm not sure this is part of your job description, but we're glad you're here. And Mark, thank you. You had some good comments tonight. I want to commend you. This has been a positive campaign. There has been the kind of the mudslinging that we've seen in way too many other campaigns, and thank you for that. I want another 4 years as county attorney because I believe I've done a good job in the previous terms, and I want to do the kind of additional criminal justice reforms that I've talked about. We need to go back to the legislature to complete the reform of the marijuana laws. We're not done yet, and we need to make those changes. I want to ensure that we have the resources to prosecute the sex cases that we should, and that the police are giving us and investigating the cases properly. I really want to spend more time with our folks in child protection because those are very, very difficult cases, and they involve how people raise their children or don't raise their children. And I know how important it is to have kids in their biological family if at all possible. I want to work to continue the high standards in our civil division that has a very positive track record both in cases they bring and in defending the county. I want to make sure that we continue to collect the amounts of child support we should so every kid has the resources to keep them healthy. Frankly, I think we've done a good job. We've learned some things that we need to do differently. I'd really welcome the opportunity to have a chance to continue those reforms. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Mike. Mark, 2 minutes to you. What's your closing statement?
Mike, I want to thank you and your family for your service to our county. Voters, when you get to that ballot box, you're going to have two choices, Mike Freeman or Mark Haase. You've got 2 weeks to figure out who you're going to vote for and dig into the facts and let your family and friends know. I hope you'll look closely at the record of both of us. And when my opponent talks about being a reformer now, I hope you'll really question that based on his record. I like to hope that if he wins, he's going to make these reforms he's talking about. I don't have a lot of confidence in that based on his record. If you vote for me, I want you to know that this is not about just me getting into office. This is about the continuation of a movement that many of you in this audience have been fighting for a very long time. And that includes conservatives, liberals, police officers, people of color, white people, suburbanites, urban people. And for those of you that haven't joined yet, I want to ask you to join us in this fight. We can have a justice system that is truly just, that's actually effective, that keeps us safe because it's just and effective, and that we can all be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Now, applaud for both of our candidates. Thank you all also for being here. I want to thank our hosts. And remember, this entire forum is available on the uptake. We'll have a story on NPR News in the morning. And of course, if you haven't already voted, vote on November 6th. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a good night.